In this module, we'll address No Child Left Behind, the 2004 amendments to the IDEA, and the 2006 federal regulations on child find and referral as they relate to evaluation and assessment. We will also go over the process for identifying students who may need special education services and for evaluating them, as well as payment for such evaluations and some of the controversy over IQ testing. We want to also look at the high expectations requirements from the 1997 and 2004 amendment to the IDEA and the refinement by the courts about what it means to provide, quote, a meaningful educational benefit, end quote, based on the student's unique needs. First, let's address child find requirements under IDEA. This is the requirement to identify, locate, and evaluate students who may have a disability. The 2006 regulations clarified that find and referral obligations include students with passing grades. A child might be identified as needing special education and related services through parent identification, identification by an educator, or through screenings, sometimes referred to as sweep screenings. These sweep screenings are quick and routine programs to identify deviation from expected performance. These could be hearing and vision, basic motor skills, or basic cognitive developmental screens. Furthermore, group screenings, statewide achievement tests, and subjects such as reading, science, and math, etc., are also commonly used in identifying a student as being eligible for educational services. It's important to note, however, that group testing might not accurately reflect a particular student's intellectual ability or achievement level due to language barriers or even illness on the day of testing. A child would be individually assessed when assessments or observations indicate a potential disability. Further testing and assessment would be referred to a multidisciplinary team, often referred to as the IEP team or the ARC team in Kentucky, for individual assessment. The IEP team determines the appropriate personnel to complete assessments, including physical examinations or evaluations by other professionals like psychologists or specialists in learning disabilities. One question that arises is whether or not the team can use an IQ test to determine eligibility. The IDEA itself does not prohibit the use of IQ tests, but courts have reached differing results in whether they are discriminatory and whether or not they should be mandated or limited. Remember the Larry P. and Pace decisions? Both cases involved the disparate identification and placement of African American students into special education classes. The Pace court addressed whether IQ tests were culturally biased. It determined that a few items were biased, but they didn't render the tests unfair so long as the tests were used with other criteria and were administered by qualified psychologists following appropriate procedures, then they could be permitted. But the burden of proving validity of the tests is placed on the school. Local school districts need to have a process in place to refer students who are suspected or known to have a disability. A team meeting is set up to discuss the need to evaluate the student. If evaluations are performed, the team meets again after the evaluations are completed to determine whether or not the student has a disability and the special education and related services needed. It's important to note that the school must obtain consent to evaluate. This includes a written notice about the proposed action, the evaluation procedure to be used, and procedural safeguards. If the parents do not agree that an assessment is necessary, or if they request an assessment and the educational agency refuses, the school must make reasonable efforts to obtain consent, and they should seek to override the refusal through dispute resolution. But the school is not required to do so. It's possible that assessment concludes and the parents still don't agree with the results of the assessment. In this case, the parents may request an independent evaluation. With respect to ensuring that assessments are not racially or culturally biased, IDEA requires that the testing procedures must be valid and reliable, administered by a trained and knowledgeable personnel, and must not be discriminatory. The costs of all assessments are covered by the educational agency, whether those are the assessments that the school completes or outside assessments that the school recommends. Further, the parents are permitted to have an individual evaluation done if they object to the educational agency's evaluation. If the school doesn't agree to pay, they may seek due process determination for the refusal. The results of any individual evaluations must be considered in any decision as long as they meet the school's criteria for evaluation. Once a student has been identified for special education services, they must be re-evaluated every 3 years or more often if warranted or requested by the parents or the school. The 2004 amendments specify that parents may only receive a re-evaluation once a year unless otherwise agreed. When it comes to developing appropriate programs under IDEA, we use the IEP. One of the key components of special education is the appropriate education, yet the term appropriate isn't defined in the statute, and that's because it's a subjective term and it depends on the individual student and the situation for that student. We often think of the Rowley decision when we talk about appropriate placement and related services. The issue in the Rowley decision addressed what's required in terms of appropriate related services for a deaf student placed in a general education classroom. Amy Rowley's parents wanted a full-time ASL interpreter in the classroom, which she had previously received, but the school did not want to provide that interpreter full-time. The district and circuit courts applied the potential maximization standard. Although Amy was achieving, there was a disparity between her achievement and her potential. The potential maximization standard means that a student should be provided an education that would allow achieving full potential commensurate with the opportunity provided to other students. However, the Supreme Court applied a basic floor of opportunity, saying, the services should be provided that permit the child to benefit from individualized instruction and sufficient support services at public expense, meeting state standards, approximating grade levels for general education in compliance with the IEP. We'll address much more about the IEP in the next module. I hope this was helpful. Have a great week.